This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We are going to be learning Parshas Vayeche. All right. So the last parsha in Sefer Bereshis, and it's always a little sad to leave some of these stories and characters behind. But I guess we'll be back next year. Okay. For our final topic over here on Wednesday nights for Sefer Bereshis. I want to talk about the following issue, all right, which is the obviously, right, we had the resolution in last week's parsha of the whole Yosef and his brother's stories. Yosef reveals himself, his father, the whole family comes down to Egypt. Yosef and Yaakov are reunited, all right, so that the whole story comes to an end. And then in this week's parsha is the end of Yaakov's life, all right, so he's saying goodbye. He's ending the end of the patriarchs, right? That's the last of the patriarchs passes away, and then his sons pass away, and of course, so that's going to set the stage for the next era of Jewish history, which is going to be not just a family but a whole nation. All right, so the issue that I want to discuss over here is at the end of the whole story, all right, when Yaakov is reunited with his son, did Yaakov ever find out what had happened? All right, because here this terrible, part of the whole awfulness of the story is that not only Yaakov and Yosef are separated for 22 years, but Yaakov thinks he's dead that whole time, right? The brothers lie to their father. They tell him that Yosef was killed by a wild animal, and they found his bloody coat. And now it turns out that Yosef is alive and well. All right, so I want to go through. We'll see that there's two different views in the commentators here. Did Yaakov ever find out the whole story? All right, what was the end of those last few decades when Yaakov and Yosef are reunited? Did Yaakov understand what had happened or not? All right, so let's go through. We'll see that there's a debate. All right, there's different commentators line up on different sides of this issue, and we'll see that there's different evidence. All right, so let's go through some of the evidence now for whether Yaakov knew at the end of his life. And then after we see that debate, then we'll come to our parsha, and we'll see that makes a big difference in how you read some of the psukim. All right, depending on whether Yaakov knew what happened or not. So let me begin with a comment of the Or HaChaim. All right, this is on last week's parsha, Vayigash. The Or HaChaim says that certainly Yaakov must have found out what happened. Right, Yaakov must have known that the brothers had sold Yosef into slavery. That he had not. He must have known that the brothers did this to Yosef. Right? Why? So he says because it's very unlikely that a guy like Yaakov would not know about it. Right? I'll read you a little. He says, Pshita shlo yimna mechakor zos. Right? It's obvious that Yaakov would start asking questions. Right? Yaakov is a very shrewd man. I mean, we followed his life story throughout, and he's a very shrewd person. Right? He knows how to get things done. Right? Of course, he's going to be asking around. How did Yosef end up in Mitzrayim? Right? For 22 years, you told me that he was dead. You told me that this was his bloody coat. So how did it happen that he's alive and well? So of course, Yaakov's going to get to the bottom of this, right? He's going to ask them about this bloody coat. Where did you find it? Why did you tell me this Baba Maisa that he was killed? Right? And eventually he must have figured out the truth, which was this terrible story that the brothers had sold their own brother into slavery. All right. So the Or HaChaim is on the record as saying that Yaakov did find out what had happened. And he says, right, how did the father put up with this? Right? How did the father deal with knowing that his own sons had sold their brother into slavery and lied to him? So he says the same way that Yosef proposes the brothers think about it. Right? Yosef says that the brother, I talked about this on Shabbos for a while, that Yosef proposes that the brothers should think about it as the will of God, right? God did this. It was not, this was out of the ordinary. So in the same way, Yaakov made his peace with it in the same way by understanding that this was the will of God, and he didn't blame his sons. Okay, so that's view number one. On the other hand, the Ramban, all right, in last week's parsha also disagrees, and he says that Yaakov never knew about it. And he says that he has his own proof, right? And the Or HaChaim's proof that he did know about it is because Yaakov was so smart and he would get to the bottom of it. The Ramban says the other way, that we know that when Yaakov gets angry, when he's upset at someone, he curses them, right? We see throughout the Torah that he'll curse, people that he's upset at. So imagine if he found out what the brothers had done, he would have cursed them. He would have been angry at them. right? So the brothers never told their father because they were worried about what he would do, right? They didn't want to be cursed by such a great man. So the brothers never told him. And Yosef was a very, good sort of, Yosef had a lot of, what do you call it? Like goodness, a lot of forgiveness in him. So he also didn't tell his father. All right, so okay, so that's the Ramban's basic argument why Yaakov didn't know, and then he has a proof to this. He says that at the end of this week's parsha, the brothers come to Yosef after Yaakov dies, and they make up this story, and they say, our father asked that you not take revenge against us. So says the Ramban, if Yaakov actually knew about it, so why didn't they just ask him to make that request honestly, right? Why did they have to lie? Why did they come to Yosef and lie and say to him that Yaakov asked him not to take revenge? Why didn't they just get Yaakov to actually ask him that? So this, according to the Ramban, proves that the Yaakov did not know what they had done to Yosef, and that's why he never suspected that Yosef would try to take revenge, because he never knew about the sale. So that's why they had to make up this story that Yaakov asked Yosef not to take revenge. Now, before I keep going over here, I just want to point out there is something funny about this whole approach, right? Because think about what we're saying, right? Again, the story in this week's Parsha Vayeche is that the brothers come to Yosef and they say, our father, before he died, asked that you not take revenge against us for what we did. Now, according to the Ramban, right, what that means is that Yaakov never knew about it, and Yosef had never told him about it, and he'd never discussed it with him. But the brothers are now informing Yosef that he did know about it, and that's why he asked him not to take revenge, right? So it becomes a very confusing sort of situation where Yosef thought that his father didn't know about it, which was actually true, and then the brothers make up that not only did his father ask Yosef not to take revenge, but his father knew about the whole sale. All right, so it gets a little confusing according to this approach. Okay, now let me just continue over here because there is other evidence to support this idea that Yaakov did not know about the sale. All right, so Tosfos, all right, so far I was quoting the Ramban. Tosfos also, in his commentary on the Torah, also takes this approach that Yaakov did not know about the sale, and he has two pieces of evidence. All right, the first is when Yosef reveals himself to his brothers. So first he says, take everybody out of here, right? Get everybody out of this room. So all the Egyptians, everybody's removed from the room except for him and the brothers. And Rashi makes a comment that he didn't really want the Egyptians to hear because it was embarrassing, right? He didn't want his brothers to be embarrassed when he revealed that he was Yosef. So everybody's out of the room. Then Yosef begins to reveal himself to his brothers, and he says, Gishu na elai, come over, right? Like, come closer to me, by Yigash, right? And they come close. So there's sort of this, even though everybody's outside of the room, Yosef tells them to come closer, right? It's unclear. Why is he telling them to come closer again? So Rashi makes a comment that they were embarrassed or they were afraid, right? They were backing away from him once he said, I'm Yosef. So he said, no, come closer to me, right? You don't have to be embarrassed. And also Rashi makes the comment that he wanted to show them that he was circumcised. So he said, come closer so you can see. All right. Tosfos says something totally different. Tosfos says that the reason why Yosef told them to come closer is because even though he told the Egyptians to leave the room, they were still listening in, right? It's like sometimes when you tell a kid to leave the room, right? They listen in through the doorway, right? So the Egyptians had their ears like pressed against the walls, and they were listening in. So Yosef was, even though he had told everybody to leave the room, he was worried that people could still hear what was going on. So that's why he said to the brothers, come closer, so that he could whisper to them. So this was like a double, this was a double effort to make sure nobody could hear. First, everybody left the room, and then he whispered to them. So according to Tosfos, when he said to them, I'm your brother Yosef, he said it out loud. He didn't care that much if people hear, right? He did his best that people shouldn't hear, but he didn't care so much if they do hear. But then when he said to them, you sold me, that's when he wanted them to come closer so he could whisper it, because under no circumstances did he want the Egyptians to hear that. Okay, because that, right, that's very, very damning, claim against them, right? It's one thing to say I'm your brother, but to say I'm the brother that you sold So that he didn't want them to hear because he was worried that the Egyptians would be like, we don't want these people living here, right? They sold their brother into slavery. We don't want them living in our country. So that's why he whispered it extra carefully so that the Egyptians wouldn't hear the second part of the sentence, that I'm the brother that you sold. Okay, that's the first approach. Then Tosfos says another approach. You know who he was whispering from? You know who he was keeping this a secret from? Not the Egyptians, from Binyamin. So the way to read this now is he sent out all the Egyptians and he said to them, I'm your brother Yosef. And then he said to the 10 brothers, right, not Binyamin, come closer so that he could whisper to them that you sold into slavery. So according to this approach, Yosef was trying to prevent not the Egyptians from hearing about the sale. That was already happening because they were out of the room. But he didn't want Binyamin to hear about the sale because Binyamin, right, didn't know about it. And he didn't want Binyamin to then go tell Yaakov, meaning he wanted to prevent not only Yaakov, but also Binyamin from ever knowing about it. Okay, so now we've added that not only did Yaakov not know about the sale, but maybe Binyamin never found out about the sale either. Okay, and that's why Yosef whispered it specifically to the other 10 brothers so that Binyamin wouldn't hear. You know, it seems a little funny because what did Binyamin think when he saw everyone crouching around Yosef, right? You know, what did he think? There's some secret, obviously, from him. But okay, that's the way Tosfos understands this. And again, right, the point of this view is like the Ramban, that Yosef did his best to keep this secret from his father and maybe from Binyamin so that they never knew that he had been sold into slavery by his brothers, right? They thought that Yosef just got lost and he got captured by someone, right? They never knew the brothers part of it. They thought that someone had just captured him on his way to the brothers and just sold him into slavery, right? There are other ways that you could make sense of what happened, that you could imagine what happened other than the brothers selling him into slavery. Okay, so that's our second argument, right? Our second commentator who thinks that Yaakov never knew about it. And that's our second piece of evidence. Again, the first piece of evidence is that the brothers made up Yaakov's request not to take revenge. And the second piece is that Yosef told them to come closer so he could whisper that they sold him into slavery. And possibly that's to keep Binyamin from hearing about it. Okay, now the third piece of evidence, again, this is probably the strongest piece. And this is like a very, very chilling idea, right? This is a very, very unbelievable idea. This is an idea that's mentioned in the Psikta Rabbasi, so in like a collection of, comments from the rabbis, as well as in the Tosfos. All right, they both point this out, that what happens in our Parsha, when Yaakov gets sick, so what does it say? It says, Vayomru li Yosef, hine avicha chole. They told Yosef, your father is sick, so come visit him on his deathbed. So now we know that Yosef and Yaakov were incredibly close before the sale, right? That's in fact why the brothers were so upset, because Yosef and Yaakov were always together, right? Yosef was constantly at Yaakov's side. So why, when they come to Egypt, does someone need to come tell Yosef that his father is sick and dying? Right? Why wasn't Yosef always at his father's side the same way that he was when he was younger, so that he would know himself that his father was sick? Right? The fact that someone needed to come and report to him that his father was sick indicates a certain distance between Yaakov and Yosef, that Yosef was not hanging around his father. Okay, so you could say on a very simple level that, right, when Yosef was a young man with no responsibility, so he spent all his time hanging around his father. Right now, he's the king of Egypt. He doesn't have time to hang around his father, right? Not to mention that Yosef probably lives in the palace or near the Pharaoh, and Yaakov lives in Goshen, so there might be some distance between them, right? So maybe that's simply the practical reasons why Yosef is not around Yaakov that much. So he doesn't know that he's sick until someone comes and tells him. But the way that Tosfos and the Psikta Rabbasi, the way they suggest this is a very, very beautiful idea. And they say that Yosef, intentionally did not spend that much time around his father, and he didn't spend a lot of time, and he didn't spend any time alone with his father. In other words, he really wanted to avoid being in the room alone with his father for a simple reason, because he was worried that his father would ask him what happened, right? He never wanted to have that conversation with his father. He didn't want his father to ask him, how'd you end up here, right? What's the real story? because I guess he would have had to lie, whatever it was, right? He was worried about his father figuring it out. So he basically avoided his father, right? It's a very, very unbelievable. It's a very chilling idea almost. It's something, really to think about, that the Yosef, out of his goodness, that he never wanted his father to discover what his brothers had done. So he basically avoided his father. He avoided being in the room alone with him, so they never could talk about it, right? This is one way to avoid awkward family conversations, right? To just avoid the people entirely. But that's what Yosef did. He avoided his father. They never talked about it, and that's why he wasn't that close with his father. And someone needed to come tell him that his father was dying. All right. So again, that would again, be evidence that Yosef was not that close with his father because he didn't want to tell him the story, and that's indicated by the fact that he needed to be told that his father was ill. Okay. Now let's go just back to the other side for a moment. All right. There's a Medrash Tanchuma. There's a comment in the Medrash that seems to indicate, like the other view, okay, the Or HaChaim, that Yaakov did find out about the story of the sale. Because the Medrash itself asks this question: why did the brothers lie and say that Yaakov told Yosef not to take revenge? Why didn't Yaakov himself just say that? So the Medrash Tanchuma answers, because Yaakov knew that Yosef would never take revenge, right? Yaakov wasn't worried in any way about Yosef taking revenge, so that's why he didn't even have to ask him. The brothers were more worried about it, so that's why they made it up. So according to the Medrash, it sounds like Yaakov did know about the story of the sale at the end of the day. All right, so this is our debate over here. Again, we have the Or HaChaim and the Medrash Tanchuma on one side, that Yaakov did find out about the story of the sale. And we have the Ramban and the Tosos on the other side, that the Yaakov did not find out about the sale. Now, let's come to our Parsha, all right? And we're going to see that this whole issue makes a big difference in how you read some of the psukim in our Parsha, right? What is one of the last things that Yaakov does is he blesses his sons, right? He gives them a deathbed blessing. Now, the blessing of Shimon and Levi, which is not really a blessing, it's sort of like he rebukes them a little bit. All right, so this is what he says, okay? He says, Shimon v'Levi achim klei chamas mechurosehem, besodam al tavo nafshi, bekahalam al techad kvodi, ki ba'apam hargu ish, ubertzonam ikru shar. All right, he basically gets mad at them. He says that they're weapons, right? They have weapons of anger, right? That he doesn't want to be part of their gathering. They killed someone. They uprooted an ox, right? He starts to rebuke them. So what does he mean by this? So interestingly, Rashi understands that he's upset about two different stories. He's upset about the story that they killed the people of Shechem. That's one thing he's upset about at Shimon and Levi. And the second thing he's upset about is that they sold Yosef. Okay, that's how Rashi reads this. So what is the clear implication of that? The clear implication is that Yaakov knew about the sale, and he even knew who was responsible for it, which was Shimon and Levi. So that's why in his rebuke of Shimon and Levi, he includes not only that they killed Shechem, but that they also masterminded the sale of Yosef. So again, that indicates that he did know about it. Now, so Rashi would seem to be in the camp of the Or HaChaim, that Yaakov did find out about the sale, and that's why he rebuked Shimon and Levi about it. On the other hand, the Ramban, who, as we said, very clearly says that Yaakov never knew about the sale, right? He thought that Yosef got sold some other way, but it wasn't the brothers' fault. So the Ramban reads that the whole rebuke of Shimon and Levi was only about one story, the killing of Shechem, but it was not about the sale of Yosef, because Yaakov never knew about that. Okay, so it's interesting to see how these two commentators are interpreting these psukim based on this other debate about whether Yaakov knew about the sale of Yosef or not. All right, so let's go through. Let's see how Rashi reads this, all right, and then we'll see how this all connects. Okay, so again, Yaakov says Shimon v'Levi achim klei chamas mechoroseim. All right, he calls them Shimon and Levi are brothers, right? So what does that mean, brothers? So Rashi says be'etza achas al Shechem al Yosef. They masterminded the killing of Shechem and the sale of Yosef. Now, how do we know that Shimon and Levi were responsible, out of all 10 brothers, that they were responsible for the sale of Yosef? So Rashi says, it's interesting because Rashi said this already earlier, but to here he says it a little differently. Earlier, at the sale, he focused on the word achim, Vayomer ishal achiv, right? But now he goes through it logically. He proves logically that it had to be Shimon and Levi, because he says, who was it going to be, right? The four older brothers are Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Now, it couldn't have been Reuven or Yehuda because they didn't want to do this, right? They were the ones that tried to prevent it. So it can't be Reuven and Yehuda, right? Now, there's six other. No, I'm sorry. There's four other brothers from Bilhah and Zilpah, right? From the servants' children, right? The Bnei Shfachos. So there's four other brothers there. So he says, no, Arelohaisa, Sinas, and Shlema, they didn't hate Yosef that much, right? Because if you remember, Yosef was friends with Bilhah and Zilpah, right? He was like on their side. He didn't like that the other brothers would call them the sons of slaves, right? So Yosef was friends with Bilhah and Zilpah. So according to Rashi, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah were not that upset at Yosef. They were certainly not upset enough to try to kill him or to sell him. Okay, so according to Rashi, it could not have been Reuven or Yehuda. It could not have been the sons of the servants. And that only leaves Yisachar and Zvulun, who are the two younger sons of Leah. So he says, no, they wouldn't have masterminded something in front of their older brothers, right? They're young men at this point. They're kids. They wouldn't have come up with this plan if their older brothers didn't agree. So that leaves the only people that could have been responsible for selling Yosef had to be Shimon and Levi. All right, so that's what Yaakov means. Shimon and Levi are brothers, meaning it's like they're brothers in arms, right? They're comrades in arms, that they do all this mischief together, right? They're what do we call them? Like when two people are bad guys together, they're whatever it is. There's a phrase. Okay, so now Yaakov continues and he says, "Besodam al tavo nafshi b'kolam al techad kvodi." Right? I don't want my presence to be in their gathering. I don't want my honor to be in their group. All right, I don't want to be associated with them. So Rashi explains that this is a reference to two further sins that are going to happen, right, later on in Jewish history. They haven't happened yet. Yaakov is prophesizing about two further sins, which are the sins of Zimri, right? Zimri, who was the man who had relations with a non-Jewish woman that Pinchas killed, so that he came from the tribe of Shimon, and Korach, who stirred up the pot with Moshe, so he came from the tribe of Levi. So basically, two of the major sinners in the desert came from these tribes. So Yaakov says, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to be associated with those events. Then he says, in their anger, they killed a man, and in their will, they uprooted an ox. So who's that a reference to? So Rashi says, again, this is Rashi's view. He says that in their anger, they killed a man, refers to the killing of Shechem. Now, what do you mean one man, right? There was a whole city. There were not just one man. So Rashi says either it means it was so easy for them to kill them, it was as if they were just attacking one man, right? It wasn't a hard battle for them. Or sometimes the Torah's grammar is that it refers to a bunch of people as one person, okay? So ish could mean a bunch of people. Either way, in their anger, they killed a man refers to the killing of Shechem. And in their will, they uprooted an ox. Who's that? It refers to Yosef. Right, so again, you see that in Rashi throughout these psukim, he keeps weaving together the two stories. What are the two sins of Shimon and Levi that Yaakov's upset about? It's that they killed Shechem and they tried to kill and then sold Yosef. All right, and Rashi says that Yosef is called a shor. It's like a beautiful ox. All right, and this is one of the images that's affiliated with Yosef, right? That he's an ox. That's what, like Yehuda's a lion, right? Yosef is affiliated with an ox, and that's just one. That's one of the images of Yosef based on this pasuk. All right, so this is one of so according to Rashi, the ox in this pasuk that was uprooted or that they tried to uproot was a reference to Yosef that they tried to sell, and again, Yaakov is referencing both of these incidents that they did, killing Shechem and trying to kill Yosef. All right, so that's Rashi's interpretation. Now, again, as I keep saying, that's Rashi whose view is that Yaakov did know about the sale of Yosef. The Ramban, on the other hand, who holds that Yaakov never knew about the sale of Yosef, so he explains that the only thing Yaakov is upset about in these psukim is the sale of Shechem. He is not upset, is the killing of Shechem. but he is not upset about the sale of Yosef because of that he never knew about. Okay, so what is the ox, right? If you're going to say that, what is the reference to the ox then? So the Ramban says that there's three possibilities over here. He quotes that Onkelos, and the Ibn Ezra also says this. They explain that the word shore can sometimes mean a wall. All right, there's a whole other root of this word, right? It has nothing to do with ox. It can sometimes mean a wall in the Torah. And so that's what it means, that they killed a man, meaning they killed Shechem, and they uprooted the ox, and not the ox, they uprooted the wall, right? In other words, they killed a city that had a wall. Even though Shechem was a walled city, they destroyed it. All right, so the whole thing is talking about Shechem and its walled city. Then he suggests another option, that even if it's referring to an ox, so it means that it was like a big animal, like Hamor and Shechem, right? The king and the prince of Shechem were the big ox, the big animal that they killed. So it's a reference to the fact that they killed the city as well as the head honchos of Hamor and Shechem. And then the Ramban quotes his own explanation, which is his own idea. And he says that it refers to the actual animals in the city, right? So they killed the people of the city, and they also killed the animals in the city. So that's why it brings in animals over here, because it's trying to say that in their anger, they killed out not only the people, but also the animals. All right, so that's how the Ramban interprets that word shore, that again, either it means a wall, or if it refers to an animal, it's either a metaphor for the king of Shechem, or it's a metaphor, or it's not a metaphor. It means literally that they killed the animals in the city of Shechem. All right, but again, I want to connect these two things over here. The commentators connect these two things, that the reason why Rashi and the Ramban seem to have this debate as to whether or not part of what Yaakov's upset at Shimon and Levi about has to do with the sale of Yosef seems to reflect this earlier debate in last week's Parsha about whether Yaakov ever found out what the brothers had done to Yosef or not. All right, so with that, we'll end for tonight, and we'll end the study of Sefer Bereshis. Hopefully, we'll learn a lot of great stuff in the next four Chumashim, and this is fair. And we'll look forward to it again next year. All right,
Rabbi,